Okay, Guy. Well, how about I got 3 o'clock. How about we just get started and folks can join us as they're able. And of course, this is all recorded as always, and we'll send it out. So thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. Again, this is David Sturts with Cooperative Strategies. I'll facilitate the conversation this summer on our summer series. Now What? Looking at reopening strategies for the fall with districts and states across the country, big, small, in between. So this summer, as you know, we're doing an interview kind of format as opposed to our workshop format from the spring, and which we'll re-engaging in the fall once we all get back into reopening and can share lessons learned, bruises, and successes in how we're navigating what will be a very, very challenging fall, no doubt. So this right now we're interviewing with Guy Bliesner from the state of Idaho. Guy, you've been with this webinar series since the get-go, listening and participating in way back when we started in March. And one of Guy's specialties and focus that he brings to the table, which we're going to talk about today, is safety. So student safety in particular. And Guy, I'll let you talk a little bit about your background here, and we get into the questions. But you can see in Guy's brief summary of his career, it started out in teaching on the side of the fence, teaching and coaching and working in security back in the 90s, and continuing through with the state level in the facilities and security ever since. So Guy has a really unique perspective coming from the classroom and focusing on security for decades through what's been obviously a dominant conversation nationally, school security, and now what does school security look like in the state of COVID? So that has, of course, many implications, and everything from more of the benign, how do you do a fire drill in a COVID-related environment, to how do we take care of our students with our concerns that we had before this while still in this environment. So I'm just going to open it up to Guy, and we changed the questions up a little bit for this one, given his focus and ability and expertise in this arena. So looking forward to hearing what he has to say. And as always, the chat box is there for your use. Please type in your questions as they pop up, and we will field them as able. So Guy, welcome.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to tell on myself. I see from the list of people, this goes back a ways, but one of the young ladies that I coached in high school as a high school swimmer is on this listening as a district official in Idaho. So Anita, always a pleasure. And that just tells you, that and the lack of hair tells you how old I am. With that, one of the things that this group and this population we've been focused on is how do we make buildings work under the restrictions that COVID-19 is going to force upon us. One of the things we haven't done is looked at what those impacts do to a operational prospect and the operational platform that you have to live with. And that starts with everything, as you said, as mundane as how do we do a socially distanced fire drill. From our perspective, we're counseling districts in our state not to change their response platform. If you have a fire, social distancing goes out the window. So don't change the platform to meet that requirement, but drill and exercise becomes a different issue than a response to an event.
Yeah, could you explain it to me when we were talking ahead of this call? Could you elaborate a little bit on the difference there? Because that wasn't immediately intuitive to me.
Well, in a real event, if the fire alarm has been pulled because of smoke, because of a gas, for whatever would impact our children, it is by far more threatening to them than being within the 6-foot social distance at that point. So don't change your platform, get them out, get them accounted for, and get ready to do the next thing on under your normal processes. Because if you try and change up processes, you know, I'm an old coach. You practice what you play and you play what you practice. And
Right.
many of these kids have been practicing this for a period of time. Don't mess them up and expect them to do something different in that most threatening of times. It will invariably, you'll have a problem there. But as we practice it, you know, in Idaho, we looked at the issues of a fire drill. You know, what constitutes a fire drill? There are three elements. You are testing the equipment. You are making certain that classroom units can move with effectiveness through their building and to a reunification point, and you're calculating how to make sure that you get everyone accounted for, all of the staff, kids, and any visitors to the building. All three of those elements can be practiced individually, and that's how we're approaching it in Idaho. We recommend that you pull the fire alarm and check the equipment when kids aren't in the building. We do not want to desensitize children to fire alarms. So do it then. Have your staff run an Arnold Schwarzenegger fire drill. I'm old enough to remember Kindergarten Cop, where he was playing and he lined everybody up at his building and took them out and did it repeatedly for those kids. We recommend something very similar. Every classroom in the building does that once every month. And then there are enough meetings for teachers through the month that at one of those meetings, whether it be, you know, professional development or faculty meeting or something, you can walk everyone through the accountability and reporting process. And when you've done all of those things, you've created a fire drill. And we worked closely with our state fire marshal to be certain that that met his needs as a fire safety official. So again, you can do these things and do them in a reasonable fashion, but there are some things that are going to happen that we haven't thought about.
Yeah.
You've talked a lot about moving kids in small groups and separate cohorts. Well, if
Right.
you do that and you're moving them into the building, you've now opened up access to your perimeter that previously has not been opened, because you're moving them through, you know, the third grade through the end door at the end of the hall, and, you know, any number of those things. We now have to create procedures and processes to be certain that when it's open to let them in, it gets closed behind them so that other people don't wander in. We always, the dominant question in school safety and security for the last 10 years has been active shooter. And
Sure.
the reality is you're 2.5 times more likely to be struck by lightning than as an educator to be involved in an active shooting event. It is horrific when it happens, but you know, we're dealing with non-custodial abduction, we're dealing with bullying, we're dealing with mental health concerns for kids, suicidality. The issue is suicidality and homicidality are closely linked, and a significant number, depending on the studies you look at, between 60 and 75% of school shooters are our own kids. They're just suicides grandly. So there's all that mental health student support stuff that we're going to talk about, and we are separating kids in a way when we come back that we haven't before. It will be more stressful, not less, for these kids.
Yeah, and Guy, you know, that's one thing that when we were prepping for this call briefly earlier this week, that just was sobering and hit me like a train when you were talking about, you know, that particular element and the mental stress, the mental health stress on kids being greater in the fall. Your assessment was, you know, sobering, that we actually are at a greater risk for some of these tragic events because of the increase in the mental health stress. Did I say that right?
I believe, again, nobody knows. We aren't there yet.
No crystal ball.
We believe that there will be more stress and more separation for kids as we strive to increase physical distancing. There's going to be some social distancing that happens that's not necessarily good for kids. If we're seeing them less often, we have eyes on them less often, so we can't track their mood. And again, educators are in a very unique situation to observe those subtle indicators of a kid in crisis.
I'm sorry, Guy. Like, I think you know, we focused a lot on obviously the physical health How do we prevent viral spread? Putting that aside for a minute, because that has dominated the room, so to speak. Looking ahead to the fall and next year, what would you say are the 1, 2, no more than 3 major sort of security-related issues that you think educators need to plan for?
Well, the first thing is as you change your operational plans, make sure your security people are at the table with you, so that they know where you're headed, you know what they need. You can work out those things that if the giant red flag goes off and they say, ooh, that's going to be a real problem, we can work around that. But that's what you pay those people for. So don't make these things up absent their input. So that means your SRO, if you have schools, paid school security, however you deal with that security issue, make sure your security people are at the table. Make sure your mental health folks are at the table, counselors, psych, sociologists, those folks who, as we work through these things, can say, okay, it'll keep them safe from the virus, but we're going to cause them to be more isolated. So these are some of the things we can do. So that's all we're trying to advocate for, is let's make certain that we don't mitigate one vulnerability by increasing the exposure to another.
Yeah. So have all your folks at the table, security and mental health and counselors at the table as well.
Yeah.
And then you were mentioning, again, as we were prepping for this call, just some basic protocols for, if there was a TSA, if you see something, say something, about the kid's state. You had a very nice 1-2 rhythm for what to do with that. And I think if you could elaborate a little bit.
Well, we believe, and we believe as the Secret Service believes, that the best tool to address shooting in schools is behavioral threat assessment and management, BTAM. And that's, again, as teachers are the ones that are best positioned to see those subtle indicators of a kid who may be making change. So do we have a viable behavioral threat assessment and management process? If you don't, now's a very good time to look at that. If you have that process, be aware that teachers, it may become secondary or tertiary on their list of things. Remind them what the intake process to that is. And when we train this, my counterpart in the Boise Valley is our BTAM specialist, but I like the fact that he talks about the intake. What's the first level of intake for a kid to the process? And that's when a teacher is sitting in the class and goes, something's not right with Johnny. Now, they may follow up and chat with Johnny a little bit, but that information ought to go somewhere so that it can be looked at. And particularly in a secondary school where you may see that kid for 50 minutes once a day, maybe the rest of his teachers need to know that you picked up on Johnny being a little off. Let's keep an extra eye on Johnny. I saw a building administrator who called that his little extra love program. He had anybody who saw a kid who was a little off tell him about it, and he would notify his other teachers, possibly his coaching staff, whoever, but say, Johnny's a little off today, he needs a little extra love. So it was just those things that say something isn't right. Again, my counterpart in Boise advocates that you put on your computers, every computer in your building, a Google form that's there as an icon that you click on the form. And he recommends 5 questions. It's time and date. Who are you? Who are you worried about? What did you see? And the last, and he says often most important question is, what else do you know? If you happen to know that there may be problems at home, his older brother got thrown in jail, whatever, but what else do you know? And then if you do that and hit submit, and it goes somewhere to be looked at by somebody, and you guys get to define who that is in your facility. It may be a counselor, maybe administrator, could be an SRO, or maybe a combination of those. But somebody who can look at that and get it. If you get one of those, Johnny is going to move up on your I'm going to get to him list. If you get 3 or 4 of those over a 2-day period from multiple different vectors, Johnny becomes a priority. So what it does is gives you that real insight into kids as they begin to exhibit behavior that's outside their baseline. And it's often very subtle. It's a kid who is normally a little shy and withdrawn, and all of a sudden he's talking and cutting up and being a pain. Or the reverse, the kid who's normally there with those, you see those 3 kids together everywhere. You haven't seen them together for 2 days and he's a little withdrawn. A kid who is normally very well dressed and well kept looks a little disheveled. Just anything that is a deviance from that baseline behavior. And in about 2 weeks, I guarantee you, most teachers can tell you what the baseline behavior of their kids looks like. So it's a powerful, powerful tool. So
that's really helpful in terms of looking at the fall. What the concerns that just listening to everybody is, it's going to be frantic opening up in the school with all the extra protocols and everything else going on. And what you're saying really hit me hard, that this is going to be undoubtedly increased stress on our kids, and that increased stress is what has led to some of the terrible student behaviors on a spectrum, all the way up to the worst, what you're talking about.
Well, and people often forget, if it's that horrible event of an active shooter and a kid who then commits suicide, we not only lost all of those, we lost that kid too.
Right.
I mean, he was somebody's son. He was somebody's brother. We lost that kid too. And in Idaho, we have one of the higher adolescent suicide rates in the nation. So it becomes incumbent on us for both self-harm and harm to others to be watching these kids.
And even down on the spectrum there, bullying, and you mentioned, non-custodial abductions, which was something that I was not aware of as being so prevalent and an issue in schools. I mean, that's a little bit outside of this purview. It's a little bit of a different animal, but just the student's holistic mental health and well-being, without a protocol set up right now in times of stress and busyness, we all know it. If we don't have a click here kind of button to take care of something, it's not going to get done, even if it should be. So I really appreciate that idea that, like, you just need a Google form or something on every computer with a simple 5 questions, and we can, Michael, we'll type those up. We'll put them in the PowerPoint before we send it out, because I think that's really important.
And we recommend it not just teachers, but everybody on the staff. I mean, lunch ladies know when kids are off their baseline. I guarantee it. Bus drivers.
Not just teachers, it's everybody.
No, the folks, in some systems, paraprofessionals do much of the student supervision. I think that's going to be a changing dynamic upcoming as well, because we're going to be supervising smaller groups of kids, so more people are going to be needed to supervise. So there's just a lot of these changing dynamics that we're going to want to look at again. And as I said, kids, and not only kids, but our staff is going to be under an incredible amount of stress as well.
Yeah. What's your thought on that, Guy? And then get to Deborah's question here a little bit on chat. But the stress on kids, I mean, obviously, first and foremost, is a consideration. And 2 things so far is, don't plan in silos. Plan with everybody that's involved in the student's holistic well-being, safety, mental health, and then in the physical space. And then have protocols set up for all adults who are in the supervisor role of kids in any way, so that they can, if they see something, they can say something quickly in a systematic way. Then it goes to somebody. That's sort of the next link here, is somebody's got to receive that note and then do something about it. But what about the adults? when in this question, what comes to mind for you?
Boy, that's, and anybody who's been involved in education will tell you that over the past 10, 15, 20 years, we've seen a much more, a much stronger emphasis on self-care for teachers and that looking out for one another. And we saw it in Idaho, particularly with our special ed staffs who were under such an incredible amount of stress. And so the issue, make sure that your administrators are aware that their staffs, most good administrators are administrators because they like people. So, but just remind them that we've got a little self-care, got to take care of our staffs as well, because these guys are going to be working hard and they're going to be doing well more than we're going to ask them to do things differently and in a much more refined fashion than we have before. And it will not just be deliver instruction. It will be any number of other things. And quite frankly, a significant portion of our teaching cadre is in that high risk category.
Sure.
So,
sure.
And that brings one that you and I chatted on, and it hit me. If you do not have a crisis response team in your school or in your district, make certain that you have one. Unfortunately, we are going to lose people. Somebody out there listening to this today will lose a staff member, or will lose a the grandpa, the well-loved grandpa who comes every Thursday to read to kids, or somebody that's closely associated with a school staff will be lost to this. And unexpected death is one of the hardest things for schools to deal with. And most schools, you want to make sure that you have that crisis response team and know what your response is going to look like. Have gamed that out in some fashion. Know who you're going to call for. In small districts, have an MOU in place with adjacent districts to help you with mental health folks. Smaller schools, if you lose anyone, it exponentially, the pond is smaller, the ripple is bigger, if you will.
Yeah, sure.
So you lose somebody, chances are it was somebody you knew well. If you're in one of those small schools, make sure that you have some help from adjacent school districts, from other places, and be prepared to send help if they need it. Look for help from faith-based organizations, mental health groups and facilities in your school or in your school community to be able to help with those things. Because again, I hate to say it, but unfortunately we will, somebody in this group will lose someone in that fashion.
Yeah, I mean, it's hit close to home already. So Guy, is this a matter of having a crisis response team is ubiquitous and every school district more or less has it? You just recommend that you dust it off, take a look at it, and be ready? Or is there something different about this that you want people to think about when developing or rethinking that plan?
Again, I want them to again, dust it off, because too often larger districts, because of just more people, more potential to use it, have a chance to exercise these things, unfortunately.
Law of averages.
Yeah. But smaller districts don't, and it may have been several years since they used this process. It may be that the people who were listed on your crisis response team, 2 of them have retired and 1 of them moved to be a principal in a building that's adjacent to you in another district. And we haven't updated those things. And that's really unfortunate that we don't update those processes ongoingly. But not too unexpected. We've got a lot of stuff to do. We teach kids.
Right.
So, but again, if you don't have, I suspect everybody has a crisis management or crisis plan, and that's separate from an emergency operations plan. It's the what do we do, and most often it is an unexpected death of somebody in your school community. But look at what your processes are. Make sure that the people who are involved in that know that they're involved in it. take them back through the process.
Right.
You know, it may have been 3 years since you talked about this.
Right. And you mentioned when we were prepping here, you know, the importance of community partnerships in those teams, local faith-based organizations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Faith-based organizations, you may have there is, you know, you may have what do I want to say, a rehab home in your community, anywhere that you have mental health trained people that you can call on in an emergency. You may want to explore how that might work for you.
Yeah. Guy, there's a couple comments, questions on the chat coming in. Robin at Montgomery County Schools in Maryland, large district, just requested an additional $250,000 for mental health services. Robin, large district there. Could you unmute real quick? And is that, just for clarity's sake, are you looking for, is that an allocation to be able to mobilize in like 1099 outside resources? Is that hiring additional full-time staff? What's your approach there in thinking?
To be clear, it's not myself personally, but the district itself.
Oh, sure. Of course. Yeah. My apologies. The district.
And I believe it's for external private mental health services if the students or families of those students aren't able to reach out for services that wouldn't be or would be above and beyond what the normal counselors would be able to provide. Right, so once they get to a level, obviously there are some services that the school district would normally be able to provide or identify services that they need. But if they believe that some private therapy, for example, might be needed, I believe that's the intention of these funds, is to assist with paying for those.
Got it. Thank you, Robin. Yeah, that's helpful. Just it makes sense, you know, having the resources you can mobilize instantly as you need them. Right. Okay. And then we had you know, a couple questions come in. One is the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement and that just general discussion that's been heightened intensely so in our nation at the time of this. You know, that's not obviously a necessarily a security thing per se related matter in our schools, but it certainly contributes to that heightened sense of tension that you were talking about, Guy. Thoughts?
Well, and I maybe disagree a little bit, David. I think it has the potential.
Unfortunately,
you know, as high school kids get wound up, and if there is another incident, we will see civil unrest, if you will, at a high school level. That's likely to happen to us. And so, you know, make sure that you understand, again, and I saw someone say something about their EOP. Go back through your EOP looking at how you might handle student unrest, civil unrest, protest type things. The other piece that's happening is we're seeing in some schools and some districts the removal of the school resource officer because of the defund movement. And, you know, my personal belief is unless an SRO is the absolute best thing a school can have, or it's the worst. There's generally not much in between, depending on the individual who fills that position. School resource officers is, you know, that role is community policing on steroids. And under the Nazaro model, it's very much a become part of the community and understand how your role fits. But if you get somebody who, and for a long time, SROs were often picked out because they were the person that their sergeant had the most problems with, most reported problems from patrol. So we'll put him in school where he'll do less.
Yeah.
So again, it's, you know, it can be the best thing you have or the worst. And I've seen some spectacular SROs. some in Anita's district, in fact. So, but it's, you know, that Black Lives Movement piece, student unrest, student protest could be a real issue for us to face in the fall.
And when you've seen these waves through the past, I mean, I think this is not my area of expertise by any stretch. So I'm gonna dance on as carefully as I can. But you know, you've been in this industry for a while in schools and security. We've seen student protest movements come and social protest movements come. This one seems pretty heightened, relatively speaking, relative to what we've had in the past few decades. What have you done in the past in thinking and talking with school districts about talking with their students and addressing that understandable and real angst in helping that be a positive, channel that in a positive way and not have it become a destructive thing for the schools?
One of the things that, and this was one I saw again, an SRO do, and he and one of the vice principals at the school he worked with went out and they identified those student leaders who probably didn't make it to student council, if you understand what I'm saying. These are those
Sure.
kids that are, you can identify them. They are student leaders, they are influencers, they are the kids who other kids listen to, but they probably don't serve on the student council. He went out and identified several, I think there were 15 of those kinds of kids, and brought them in and just started talking to them about, hey, you know, let's be real. I know you influence people, you know you influence people. Let's talk about how we might benefit one another. So, you know, and it was amazingly effective in a school that was highly split, almost 50-50 Hispanic and white, and there were some racial tensions in that school, and he did a great deal to alleviate that simply by sitting down and talking to the people. You know, the guy who's the student body president probably would have never reached these kids, but coming up the other way it did, and did a great deal to lower the tension level in that school.
Yes, nothing either.
That's fascinating. So really using the student network and, you know, figuring out who your influences are, and then having regular conversation about, hey, this is tension, this is the struggle, let's be real about it, and how can we make this a better place together? Absolutely.
And you know, I did notice on the chat, I'm jumping you a little bit here, but the crisis plan, separate from the EOP, it often is and probably shouldn't be. It should be an annex of your emergency operations plan. But I suspect that many schools had a sudden death policy or protocol well before they had an EOP. And it may or may not have changed, and it may or may not have made it into the emergency operations plan. Probably this year is not a good time to review that emergency operations plan, but it may be a good time to make notes about things that you want to review, and note if it's, you know, gee, is this in my EOP?
Great, thanks, Guy. Any comments, questions from the group on this discussion? It's touching on a lot of you know, real important social hot buttons right now, and things that are going to be on top of the conversation, including, you know, beyond COVID in the fall.
Well, and you say beyond, and I say coincidental with, and that's the real problem that we're going to have, is we may tend to drop off some of this stuff because we're so focused on making sure that we wipe all the door handles.
Yeah, and that would be to everybody's detriment, and especially the kids. Is one of the things that you really hit me with when we were talking this morning, is these issues are going to be more salient, more of an issue for our kids, and something that we have to prioritize, as well as wiping the door handles, as you said.
Well, and it's, you know, again, it's not only at the school level, but it's all of these kids, all of these things these kids are bringing with them to school from home. Schools are simply a reflection of the society they serve. So those, you know, the issues of job loss and homelessness and all of those things, I expect will likely be magnified, not reduced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I pick on my former athlete? Anita, if you're—
Of course, go
if you
ahead. Go ahead, please.
unmute a little bit and talk about some of the things I know you guys in Nampa are doing. So jump into this one, would you?
Funny, I was private messaging Dan how we keep our two groups very separate, our emergency operations planning team and our crisis response team. And he mentioned that, again, using that incident command structure would make a lot of sense in that mental health response. But what we see is that our school-based mental health professionals really have led and organized all of our response in that, and how we go about supporting our schools and coordinating those efforts and support. But I'm still over here pondering that idea of how you would better incorporate it into your emergency operation plan. I know that we're kind of in a boat where we annually have rebuilt and added and changed to our EOP each year. And we're kind of at the, oh, wow, we learned a lot this last year. And normally we'd be doing some huge edits and changes, but I think that we really have looked at how can we make those changes in such a way that we're not changing at a busy start to the school year as well. So just an interesting time in emergency planning.
And by the way, the SRO I was referencing, you know well.
Kurt Schenkel.
might have been.
So, Guy, I'm curious, and then we're going to go on to one of the next questions here, but on sort of liability concerns and matters, but I didn't want to get off this topic quite yet. When we went home virtual education in the spring, what did you see in terms of the topics that we've discussed, in terms of crisis management, in terms of, checking in and responding to potential student mental health crises? What happened?
We lost eyes on
when we
kids.
Went virtual.
Very simply, we lost eyes on kids. By that time in a school year, you've identified kids that maybe need a little help, and you maybe are checking in with them, twice a week, or every day they check in with the counselor when they get to school, or you've implemented a number of things for vulnerable kids that you've identified at that point. All of a sudden, they all went home and we stopped seeing them. It just eliminated our eyes on. And they went home to sometimes not, school was the place they came to get away from the stress. So all of a sudden they weren't in. In many cases, Idaho has a statewide tip line that our office pays for that can be used for kids. And as a part of this, we added things like, a kid could report food insecurity. He could report abuse at home. He could report things that were not part of that reporting process initially. And so, we've tried to beef up that component as we go. But quite frankly, it was a little spooky, and it was really concerning for our school counselors, who are the keepers of most of that, when all of a sudden the kids simply were not there to check on.
Well, then we are in many school districts are going to have at least partial digital instruction next year, at least in the fall. And some plans are looking at high schoolers completely digital, but many are looking at some kids digital some of the time, at least. So that those touch points are going down. What do we need to add to or rethink in terms of those two big topics we've talked about, crisis response and student, mental health intervention, in a digital teaching environment?
One of the things, again, is make certain that kids have, we hear about these things in education because we build relationships with students. They bring that to us because they trust us. So we have to make certain that there are ways for those kids to make those reports back to people they trust. It may be anonymous tip reporting. It may be non-anonymous. It may be, maybe our counseling staff gears up and they make group calls to 3 or 4 kids. They maybe could do some groups over the phone. the list of potentials are endless, but what we have to do is, as much as possible, recreate some of that social connection that physical distancing is going to limit.
Yeah. So in any kind of planning process, the first question I ask is, what's the DNA? So what's unites? What's the center, the core of this plan? I think you just hit it. It's relationship. Whatever you do, and you could do a myriad of different things, keep relationships over these kids however you can, and that opens the door to everything else. I mean, any wins that you've seen in that department in a digital world, or
I've seen a number of those things, and I think we all saw them, particularly in graduation this year. My wife teaches special ed at an elementary school, and for whatever, better or worse, whether you agree with it or not, kindergarten graduation is a big deal. The kindergarten teachers went around and put "you graduated" on a sign, and put the sign in every one of their kids' lawns, and did the "you congratulation," and they did a drive-through parade where the kids came by and they waved each other. Just anything that you can do, and it will be as varied as what's available to you and what makes sense in your community and in your school. And there are a lot of wins out there, but don't offhandedly discard something. It may be genius. The drive-in movie theater graduation that was seen in multiple places.
That was with a client of mine just north of here.
Actually, it happened here in Idaho Falls for for the Bonneville School District as well. So it's.
So did it really?
They're great ideas can be come up with individually all over, and it's just look for those opportunities to recreate that relationship piece. It may be a kids forum on Zoom. Give me a call. We're gonna, one of the major things we've seen is that mentoring process that's taken place, where we have a homeroom and all kids have a individual who in a high school that may be their mentor or their connection to the school for the 4 years they're in that school. So, recreate those things as you can digitally. And in some cases, recreate them a little bit in open space in the classroom with a mask on. But it's just the issues. We have to stress the relationship piece.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And Guy, I think it's safe to say, based on what you're saying, is that we need to stress, we need to emphasize relationship piece and couple that with the reporting piece. So whoever is engaging in those relationships to have at his or her fingertips the ability to say, I saw something, it was off, here's the time, here's what I know, blah, 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 and it goes somewhere. And that seems to me in this environment to be something that really should be mobile. It should be on somebody's person wherever they go.
I believe so. And the other one is to make sure that everybody understands what the reporting threshold is. And when we do behavioral threat assessment training, for us, if you go, that's not right, teachers are empathetic by nature. If you go, something's not right here, guess what? Something's probably not right. And if you report it and the coach reports it and the English teacher reports it and a bus driver reports it, you get multiple vectors of input into where this kid is and what he or she is feeling at that moment. So
in addition to training on how to wipe your doorknobs extra times this year, we need to emphasize looking out for something's not right, and then what to do about that, and have something set up.
Yeah, very, very clearly delineated.
So training is
process.
Huge. Yeah, that's great stuff, Guy. Thank you. So somebody else, Dan just posted, has anybody thought about reporting of child abuse and neglect in our area? We had a significant drop in reports. Yes. Well, that's Dan, that's a real concern. Heard those reports. That's personal. Been involved in working with kids in that situation, and that's a major concern. Guy, like that just seems like another element on top of this. Something's not right, and you report from a mental health perspective. This something's not right, and I have a mandate to report.
Right, and that's that mandated reporter piece. But when you're not seeing those kids, it's hard to do that. But again, what we did was try and gear up that anonymous tip reporting process to allow a kid to report on either himself or his friend that he was concerned about in those situations. So a very robust reporting process that kids can access will be a benefit to them.
And I missed that earlier, Guy, because that's fantastic, because part of the reporting that is not only the adults acting in loco parentis, but you're saying the kids having that chance to look out for each other and having that available to them. So I think when you were talking, our kids are going to be learning a lot on these devices, on these computers. Have you set up something like that where there's an icon and they can click and do an anonymous report? Is it that simple as well?
Well, and a number of states have a statewide tip reporting process on issues of violence already. What we did was alter ours to allow them to report food insecurity or the potential for abuse at home or whatever they wanted to. So what you do is take what you already have and widen the scope. So that kids, and then make sure that, again, do all you can to make certain that kids know they have access to that process.
And is that, okay, and you shared with me, and I'm going to post, just kind of share this on my screen right quick. I shared in the beginning of this conversation a link to Idaho's website, and I'll just put this up here on the screen for a minute. So if you want to visit that link, Guy was showing, there's a lot of downloadable resources that have been created, including everything from that socially distanced fire drill that's broken into 3 parts, as Guy mentioned, to some of these other items. So a great resource. But yeah, would like to follow up with you, maybe even continue beyond this and send out some resources to our folks here on how those forms work and what some good examples are, so somebody can just download and use a copy of that Google form for reporting. Can look at, sort of a tip line option for kids and have that at the ready and part of the reopening planning, in addition to all of the physical health stuff. I think is huge. Very important.
I will absolutely, the young lady in our office that runs our tip line protocol is exceptional, and she'll talk to anybody as long as you want to listen to her about tip line, how it can be used, what's the easy way to implement. Kayla's spectacular, and her contact information is on our website as well.
Okay. Yeah, what's her name?
Her name is Kayla Green, and the program is See Tell Now. We wanted to use See Something, Say Something.
Tell Now, okay.
But we like the Do It Now piece, because I talked to policemen, they said, yeah, somebody is see something and they'll tell me, but they tell me 3 days later when they see me getting a cup of coffee at the local Kmart, and there's not much I can do. So we added the now piece to that. And again, it's an app-based program that we got a federal grant that we put together, but something, and it could be as easy as that Google form piece we talked about on your district website.
So thanks for that. And then several comments are coming up here in the chat about, Bonnie shared something from Oregon. Appreciate that. Comment that, hey, having something on the computer is maybe accessible, but also maybe a barrier. And if there's that, key logging software, you might have kids reluctant to report that way. So have a phone number available too, trying to have multiple avenues. Is that what you have, Guy?
Absolutely. And I noticed the Safe Oregon reference. Ours mirrors the Safe Oregon protocol fairly closely, similar to the Safe Utah app, similar to the one in Colorado. A number of states have these. It's just talk to whoever runs them and see if we can augment it a little bit to maybe pick up some of these things that it wasn't initially designed for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and, you know, maybe lastly, as we have the last few minutes to take a bit of a pivot on the conversation. You know, one of the things, Guy, that you've kind of tossed little balloons up in our conversation in the past several months is liability. Hey, remember this. And, you know, it seems like concerns about liability over decision making is at the heart as to why a lot of the guidance that we're being provided is so vague in many instances.
And
so
it is.
Go ahead.
And you know, as educators, give me a standard of care. I'll meet the standard of care. It's just right now the standard of care is you probably ought to do something, which leaves it a little vague. Liability comes when there is a standard of care and you do not meet that standard of care.
Yeah.
Well, right now it's what is our standard of care and how close did we get to meeting it? And one of the things that I'm going to say is going to drive people nuts because it is a major league annoyance. I mean, my dad had much stronger words for it, but it doesn't matter what you do. It matters what you can prove you did. That means you better document every training piece as you implement a new wipe down protocol. Document the training you did to those people. Document the fact that you gave them an after class quiz. Document that you check it on a regular basis. I mean, it doesn't, again, document all of those things that you do, because at some point, and this is an unfortunate commentary on the state of the world, but we are the most litigious society in the history of, in history. After every critical event in the last 30 years, there have been lawsuits, and it is human nature to want to blame somebody when you have an adverse outcome. And our legal system has made it easy to do that. So again, you know, as we're putting all of these wonderful things together, make certain that we document what we do. That means document the training, document the process, document the oversight, document the discussions, document.
So takeaway is the standard of care is maybe difficult to define. I mean, we can say generally it's about trying to reduce contact between people as reasonable as all the guidance says, enhance cleaning, you know, and you know, signage and hand sanitation stations and all of those kinds of things is sort of become a de facto standard of care. But what you're saying is whatever you do, document, and that's going to matter at least as much.
And if you have 3 or 4 school districts in your area, get with those folks. And if you do something, if your standard of care is relatively similar district to district to district, it will lower the incidence of litigation because everybody's doing approximately the same thing. Now, there are two types of litigation. You know, they can litigate against the standard of care, and there's not much you can do about that. But it's once you have an established standard of care and you fail to meet it that you put yourself at risk. So you want to document the way you meet the standard of care that you have determined to be the standard of care you're going to meet. And this is one of those that you develop it with your local health officials, you develop it with your parents. Some of this is going to be driven by what your parents are going to require that you do so that they're comfortable sending their kids back to your school. So you're going to want to make sure that you have parents involved in this, and then be very, very clear at the outset what the standard of care is.
Yeah. And the coordination between districts is something that hearing a lot of, you know, around trying to do that. It's not easy. I mean, everybody's trying to figure out their own work. And I think it's safe to say that there would not be uniformity and unanimity in all responses in every facet of school operations, nor necessarily should there be. But determining on some key things like what are we doing about loading buses? How are we doing that? What are our cleaning protocols in terms of disinfecting and so forth? Some basics. What are we doing in terms of school capacity? How are we navigating that? A handful of things. Let the details fall on a lot of the more minor operational things can be separate, but on some things having a standard with your neighbors is helpful.
Not only that, but the National Council has done a good job with some general recommendations. Absent getting a standard of care from your state health department or your state board of education or something, fall back on, because the CDC standard is nebulous enough that it's not a standard, it's sort of a general idea. So look for a standard of care, and the authorizing agency matters. The stronger the authorizing agency, the better your standard of care. It may not be any better in operation or in practice, it just looks better from a legal standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I'm not an attorney. I don't even play one on TV. If you want specific legal advice, contact your local school district official and ask them.
I even heard the asterisk there before you said it.
Yeah, I had to do the disclaimer.
Of course. Yeah, well, Guy, this has been fascinating. I really appreciated the conversation. Was looking forward to it, and definitely sort of heightened in my mind and for future conversation the real importance of communicating out to all stakeholders, to your staff, of course, but also even students. Hey, look out for each other. And I have to say, I heard in my, little sample size of one here in my family when we were doing the online school, my middle daughter's teacher, just checking in on the students on their little Zoom. How are you, listening to it? And it's one thing to do that with a group of second graders who are all going to say everything's fine when they're on a call. But how to, thinking about it real targetedly, how are we going to really check in on our kids? How can our kids check in for us, themselves? And then how can our staff check in on each other in a way that isn't a big brother, isn't a big sister, isn't a punitive, isn't a negative, but really is, I like the phrase you said in the beginning, a little extra love campaign. I think that's a nice way, maybe a little tongue-in-cheek, but a nice way to say it.
I liked it as well. And the one thing that I always remind people, I was a high school teacher, and the kids coming back this year, we knew last year, those kids who were a little fragile, who we knew might be, we know who they are. Start immediately reaching out to those folks. Yeah.
Well, Guy, great. I really appreciate it. The resource website is up on in the chat. This PowerPoint really, we'll look to add those comments and those questions that you had about the screening, behavioral health screening to that, and then we'll put that up on the website as well. And we'll look forward to continuing the conversation next week. Guy, thanks so much. Any closing thoughts?
My contact information is on our website. Feel free to drop me an email, make a phone call, do whatever. I'm more than willing to engage.
Okay. Well, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Guy, thanks so much, and we'll look forward to speaking with you next week.
All right. And again, my contact information's on the website. Feel free.
Okay. Thanks, Guy. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate that. That was fascinating.